Namo Manjushri, Namo Sushri, Namo Tamashri, so Om Namo Manjushri, Namo Sushri, Namo Tamashri, so oops. So good evening. And is there anyone here for the first time? Any first timers? Well, hi. Welcome. So what we usually do in this Thursday night, oh, is it working? You should be red light on. Okay. So what we usually do in this Thursday night class is meditation. And oops, that's the wrong one. And we start off with meditation on the breath, mindfulness meditation, using the breath as an object. Are any of you like new to meditation, or you have done meditation before? Not much. Is that not much? Okay. Well, it's fine. I'll give some basic instructions before we start. So there's many different kinds of meditations, different ways of meditating. It's not all the same. Not everybody meditates in the same way. So a very common and popular kind of meditation, and what we find in Buddhism, involves using the breath as a kind of focal object for your meditation. So in other words, you use the breath as a sort of a base to focus on, to try to stay attentive to. And then usually the mind doesn't stay with the breath very long. It wanders away, thinks about other things, or gets distracted by sounds or other sensations in the body. So this is what usually happens. But when we notice that our mind has wandered away from the breath, we try to bring it back to the breath. And doing this not in a kind of forceful way, being hard on ourselves, being pushy with ourselves, but trying to do it in a kind and gentle way, bringing our attention back to the breath again and again. It's actually quite hard to do this. Basically, I mean, the technique is quite simple, just sit down and watch the breath. It's not very complicated, but it becomes difficult because of the nature of our mind, the way that our mind is. Our mind just isn't used to staying with one thing for very long. In fact, some researchers, did research into normal human attention span, and they find that people are able to stay focused on one object only for a few seconds at a time. That's normal. That's normal. So that means, our mind just isn't used to staying with one thing for more than a few seconds. It's always going from one thing to another, jumping here and there and back and forth and so on. And so, so it's actually quite hard to keep the mind focused on just one object. So usually when people try to do this, they find it difficult. And sometimes they may feel, oh, this is too hard, I can't do it. Or they might feel, there's something wrong with me, I can't do this. But it's helpful to know that if you find it difficult, that's normal. It is difficult. So you shouldn't worry, you shouldn't feel like there's something wrong with you. Everybody finds it difficult. But if we keep practicing, then it does get easier. We're able to bring our mind back more and more often to the breath. Or it doesn't have to be the breath, it could be other objects. But the breath is often recommended as an object because it's already there. We don't have to think of anything or visualize anything, or bring something and put it in front of us and look at it. So the breath is part of us. We're breathing all the time, so it's already there. And in that way, it's an easy object to use. And also, another thing is that when we do pay attention to the breath and try to stay with the breath, it has a calming effect on our body and our mind. So it naturally calms us down physically and mentally. So that's another reason that it's a good object to use. And just to mention, for any of you who were here last week, in last week's class, we were speaking about some difficulties that some people have with regard to meditating on the breath and how to work with those difficulties. So I'm just going to repeat that. And if any of you find yourself facing any of these difficulties during this meditation that we're going to do, try to apply the remedies that I suggest. So one of the difficulties is boredom. The breath is boring. So it is, in a way. It's not so exciting as, computer games or movies or, looking on Facebook and so on. So this could be one reason why it's difficult to stay with the breath, because it seems not so interesting. And so with regard to boredom, I suggested that, and this is just coming from my experience, so, it worked for me, but it may not work for everybody, but it's something you could try. What I find is that boredom happens because we're not really paying attention. So if we really pay attention to our breath or whatever object you're using, really focus in a very attentive way, really looking at what is happening each moment, then actually you discover it isn't so boring. There is actual change taking place every single moment. One breath is different from the breath that came before and the breath that comes after. So each breath is actually unique and different. And if you really focus and pay attention to it, then your boredom, this is my experience again, the boredom goes away because you discover there's actually a lot happening in every single moment. And so you could try doing that. Try to just really pay attention, really, focus very well. But that doesn't mean, like the word concentration, I don't know how it sounds to you, but sometimes the word concentration can sound like you have to squeeze yourself, kind of forcing yourself or squeezing yourself. So when people try to do meditation that involves concentrating, they might become a bit tense, like forcing themselves to stay concentrated on the object. But that actually is not such a good idea, because it's more effective if we can keep our body and our mind relaxed rather than tight and tense and stressed. So the ideal is to be relaxed, physically relaxed, also mentally relaxed. And then just try the best we can to stay with the object, like the breath, but in a gentle way, not in a tight, forced kind of way. So actually, there's a story from the time of the Buddha. And he was, I can't remember the exact details of the story, but anyway, he used the analogy of a musical instrument like a guitar or a violin that has strings, and usually there's they call it a key, I think, you know, that tightens or loosens. It's called a key. This device that you move. Okay, tuning peg. Okay, there's a tuning peg that you use to tighten or loosen the strings. And if you tighten it too much, the string doesn't make a very nice sound. It's kind of a unpleasant sound. But if it's too loose, it also doesn't make a nice sound. So you need to work with this tuning peg until the tightness of the string is just right, so that it makes a really beautiful sound. So the Buddha said in a similar way with our mind, when we're practicing meditation, it's not helpful if our mind is too tight. If it's too tight and tense, then that doesn't work. But if our mind is too loose, that also doesn't work. If the mind is too loose, then it's sort of all over the place. There's no it's like chaos. Mind just wandering everywhere. But if it's, on the other hand, if it's too tight, then the mind will be tight and tense, and that's not a good state of mind for meditation. So we need to work with our mind and, you know, kind of go back and forth between those two states of being too tight, being too loose, until we find just the right state of mind. Not too tight, not too loose, but just right to be able to meditate well. And then another problem we talked about last week was aversion. So it's possible to not just feel bored with the breath, but actually feel some kind of aversion for it, you know, like I don't like this object. So that does sometimes happen to people. It could happen towards the breath or towards whatever object you're using. And this is particularly problematic because if you're trying to stay concentrated on an object and you actually don't like that object, if you have some kind of aversion for that object and then you're trying to force your mind to stay on it, then it could build up into really very strong aversion. And you might even get to the point where you run away from meditation screaming, you know, I don't want to do this anymore. This is terrible. I hate this. So we have to be careful and try to avoid that problem. So be aware of your mind and your thoughts and your feelings, and try to look out for any kind of attitude like that, like aversion, disgust, dislike towards the object, whether it's the breath or whatever object it is. And I mean, you can use other objects. The Buddha didn't say everybody has to meditate on the breath. That's the only object you can use. There are other objects that can be used if you really don't like the breath. But on the other hand, it can also, I think it's also a good idea to try to work with the aversion and overcome the aversion. And one way of doing that is, I mentioned last week, is just to understand how precious the breath is. You know, the breath is actually totally necessary for our life, for our existence. If we didn't have the breath, we wouldn't be alive. Right? If we stopped breathing, we would die. So breath is precious. And you would probably realize that in a very powerful way if you got stuck in like an elevator or some other kind of small environment, and it got stuck, and you know you have a limited amount of air to breathe, and you know that could really lead to panic, to realize that you might not be able to continue breathing at some point. So just the fact that we are able to breathe, we're able to breathe in and breathe out, one breath after another, is something really wonderful, really fantastic, really amazing. It's like a miracle, you know? And that means we can continue to be alive, which is what we want. You know, people want to stay alive, they don't want to die. So that's just one suggestion. You can be creative and find your own ideas about how to see the breath as something interesting and precious, so that you don't have aversion for it. You know? So I'm just saying this in case you have that problem, in case you feel, oh, I don't like the breath. I don't want to watch the breath. I want to watch something else. So it might be helpful to just try to change your attitude about the breath and come to see it as something not boring, not unpleasant, but something actually quite precious. And then another problem we spoke about, you mentioned this problem of controlling the breath. So they say that when we do meditation on the breath, it should be done in such a way that we're not like controlling our breath coming in and going out, but rather just let go of any sense of controlling and just allow the breath to flow in and out in a natural way. But some people find that hard to do. They find that they're maybe unconsciously, unwillingly getting into a control mode with regard to the breath. So it might be helpful if you notice that happening to just try to let go of that tendency to control. Just let go of the controlling attitude, controlling state of mind, and just allow the body to breathe. Just let go and let the body breathe on its own, because it's able to do that. It doesn't need to be controlled. And I think that whatever problems that we experience during meditation are also problems that we have in our life. Yeah, they're like our kind of habitual problems. So they don't occur only when we're meditating, but they occur outside of meditation as well. So if there's this tendency to be controlling, with regard to the meditation object, the breath, then that's probably also something that happens in other situations as well. So it might be helpful to just try to work with that, try to work with, letting go of giving up this tendency to control. I know it may not be easy if it's a long-term habit, but sometimes just by being aware of it, just noticing when that is happening, when that control attitude is coming up, just noticing it, and then stepping back from it, looking at it in an objective way rather than getting completely caught up in it. Just noticing it, letting it happen, and then letting it go. So that's something you could try to do. It's just a suggestion, but again, don't feel that you have to do what I say. You might find your own way of dealing with these kind of problems. Okay, so now let's start the meditation. So let's start by sitting in a comfortable position for meditation. So have your legs crossed in whatever way is most comfortable for you. Because the ideal thing is to be able to sit without having to move too much for the duration of the meditation session. So we'll be meditating for about 15 minutes. So try to find a position in which you can sit for 15 minutes without moving too much. I'm not saying you can't move at all. It is okay to move if you need to, but it's actually better to try to sit still and not move too much. And it's also recommended to keep the back straight. Sit with your back straight, but that doesn't mean being tense. So ideally, let your back be relaxed and your shoulders and your neck be relaxed, not tense and tight. And you can have your hands resting in your lap or on your knees, whichever way is most comfortable for you. Let your mouth and jaw be relaxed. And it's a good idea to place the tip of the tongue on the roof of the mouth behind the upper teeth. So doing that cuts down on the need to swallow. You won't need to swallow so much. Swallowing can become a kind of distraction if your mind gets really calm and in a deep state of meditation. And as for the eyes, it's actually better not to close them completely, because closing the eyes can lead to sleepiness, to drowsiness. So instead of closing them completely, you can leave them open a little bit, just enough so there is some light coming in. And if you have your eyes looking down onto the floor in front of you or onto your lap, then you won't be so likely to see things that would distract you. So the idea is to have your eyes open a little bit, but not be looking at things, not be engaged with objects of sight, visual objects. So try to do that, but it can be difficult. If you find it difficult, uncomfortable, or distracting to keep your eyes open a little bit, it is okay to close them. But if you do close your eyes, try to be aware if you start to feel sleepy. And if you do, to overcome sleepiness, you can try opening your eyes a bit. So now just quickly with your mind or your awareness, go through your body. You can go from the top of your head down to your toes, or if you prefer, you can start from your toes and go up. Just quickly scan through your body, looking for tension. If you do notice tension anywhere in your body, see if you can let go of the tension. You can just imagine the tension melting and flowing away, going out of your body and sinking down into the earth down below us. And there it just disappears. Just let all tension drain out of you, sink into the earth. And then it's also a good idea to try to generate a positive motivation, positive attitude about why we are here, why we are meditating. So the most positive attitude we can have is what is called altruism. So that means caring about others wanting to be helpful, beneficial to others as much as we can, and not wanting to harm them, wanting to avoid causing problems, suffering for others. So I think we all have this attitude naturally, but it's good to bring it to mind, bring it up in our mind, and then think that that's why we're here. That's why we're doing this meditation, because we want to be helpful to other people, to the world, and we want to try to bring an end to suffering and problems and pain in other people and in the world, and in ourselves, of course. So we can think something like, may this meditation that we are going to do bring peace and happiness and benefit to myself, to others, to the world as much as possible. Might help bring an end to suffering such as war and violence, depression, and so forth, in myself, in others, and in the world. And it's also good, if you can, to have an attitude of kindness and caring, gentleness during the meditation. So being kind and caring and gentle towards yourself, towards your body, towards your mind, towards your thoughts, towards whatever occurs in your experience during the meditation. But try to keep your mind soft and gentle and caring. So the meditation involves mainly focusing on the breath, being aware of each breath as it's coming in and going out. And you might find it helpful to count your breaths. Counting can help keep the mind on the breath. So one way of counting is to count each breath, each full breath as one. So you can think breathing in, breathing out, one, breathing in, breathing out, two, and so on. If you're relatively new to meditation, just count up to 5 and then go back and start again at 1 whenever you reach 5. But if you're more experienced, you could count up to 10 or up to 20 or 21 as you wish. And then just keep going back to 1 whenever you reach that number. Now, other things are going to happen during the meditation. You're going to have thoughts coming up in your mind, thoughts, feelings, memories, images, and sounds. There's always noise, sounds. So these things are going to happen and you're going to be aware of them. And usually the mind gets distracted, paying attention to those other things. So when that happens, when you notice your mind has gone away from the breath to some other object, like a thought or a sound, just accept that. That's normal. Don't be upset with yourself or beat yourself up. Just try as soon as you can to let go of or disengage from that other object and bring your mind, your awareness back to the breath. So those other objects are transitory, impermanent, not permanent. They come and they go. They can be compared to clouds that come and go in the sky. So they're not permanent. So Being aware of that can help you to let go of these other objects. Just let them be, let them come, let them go. And then come back to the breath. And don't worry if you have to keep doing this again and again. It's completely okay. It's completely okay to come back to the breath again and again whenever it wanders away. So don't feel bad about that. Try to be patient, kind, gentle with yourself. Just keep coming back to the breath again and again. Now you can move. So do any of you have a question you'd like to ask? Anything that came up during the meditation and you're not sure what to do about, how to deal with? So I came across an article some time ago by an American, he's a psychologist, he's also a meditator, and he's somebody who's been involved a lot in the dialogues between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and scientists. They have this, I guess it's an organization called the Mind and Life, Mind and Life, something about Mind and Life. Anyway, and they have yearly meetings, conferences to discuss different aspects of meditation, spiritual practice, as well as science and philosophy and psychology and so forth. So Richard Davidson is this scientist and meditator. And so there was this article in which he spoke about 4 keys for well-being. And he said, so he's involved very much in doing research on the brain and using MRI machines, to scan the brain and so forth. And so he says he's talking about well-being, and he says well-being is a skill. The work my colleagues and I have been doing leads inevitably to this conclusion. Well-being is fundamentally no different than learning to play the cello. If one practices the skills of well-being, one will get better at it. So well-being isn't just something that happens, but it's something we can learn, we can develop, we can work at, get better at. Based on our research, well-being has 4 constituents that have each received serious scientific attention. Each of these 4 is rooted in neural circuits, and each of these neural circuits exhibits plasticity. So we know that if we exercise these circuits, they will strengthen. Practicing these 4 skills can provide the substrate for enduring change, which can help promote higher levels of well-being in our lives. So one of the building blocks of well-being is attention. So attention means being able to stay attentive to things rather than having our mind wandering all over the place. To paraphrase the title of a very important paper that was published several years ago by a group of social psychologists at Harvard, a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So the more our mind is out of control, wandering everywhere and so forth, the more chances there are of unhappiness. So in this particular study, researchers asked people about what they were paying attention to during their normal life, their daily life. And they found that people spend an average of 47% of their waking life not paying attention to what they're doing. Almost half, huh?
Half?
47%, almost half. So that's normal. Half of our time, we're not paying attention to what we're doing. Actually, I think it could be higher in some cases.
48 hours you're asleep.
Huh? No, this is the waking. This is the waking time. This is waking time. And William James, he was a one well-known psychologist in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and he did a lot of research. He was one of the people who did research into attention, and found that normally people don't have very good attention span. And he said that the ability to voluntarily bring back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. And he went on to say that an education that sharpens attention would be an education par excellence. And just in case you're interested, so attention is one of 4 skills that promotes well-being. So if we can train our ability to pay attention to what we're doing, which is basically what mindfulness is all about. Mindfulness means paying attention to what's happening in each moment, what we're doing with our body, what we're doing with our mind, and so forth. So if we can train ourselves to stay more attentive, more mindful, this will help with well-being. And there's scientific research to back that up. And then the other 3 skills out of the 4 are resilience. Do you know what that means? Resilience? Is there a Danish word for it? So it's the ability to bounce back after some tragedy, some crisis, some problem. Yeah, so some bad thing happens to us and we kind of crash. We get upset, unhappy, we feel grief, we feel, emotionally in turmoil. But sooner or later, people are able to get back to a state of balance and harmony and so forth. So some people are better at it than other people. Some people can bounce back quite quickly, whereas some people, I guess, get stuck in an unhappy state, a disturbed state for a long time, and it's hard for them to bounce back. But apparently it can be trained. It's something that we can learn, we can train to have more resilience. And then another one is having a positive outlook. That means being able to see the good side of people, being able to see people's positive qualities, positive abilities, not just negative things. So being able to see things in a positive way, people, the world, situations, and also ourselves. And again, that's something that maybe some people have it more naturally, but others don't. But it can be trained, it can be changed. So we can learn to see things in a more positive way. And then the last one of the 4 is generosity, being able to be generous with others, give to others. And I don't think that only means materially, but also giving our time, giving our energy, giving our love, giving our care. So these are the 4 things that scientists have found helpful to well-being, physical and mental well-being. And the good news is we can work on them, we can improve them, we can train to have more if we are lacking in any of these. So anyway, attention is one. And this is what we try to train ourselves to do in meditation, like bringing our mind back to the breath or whatever you're meditating on again and again and again. And it's not easy, but it's something we can train, we can learn. But it's particularly difficult in a situation like this, being in the city, having a busy life, working many hours during the day, doing many different things, talking on the phone, working on the computer, and so on and so forth. So having a busy life and then trying to sit down and keep your mind focused on one object, such as the breath, is particularly difficult. Even if you go away to a quiet place and go to a retreat, some of you may have done that, right? Go to a retreat and there you have very peaceful, quiet environment, and you don't have to run around and do other things. You only have to meditate all day long, and you don't even have to cook. Food is served for you and so forth. But even in that situation, it can be very difficult to focus the mind. So they say that it really takes time. If you really, really want to develop strong attention, then ideally you need to stay in a quiet place and quiet situation for a long time and do a lot of meditation, and then gradually your ability to stay attentive increases. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to do it during our normal life in the city. It's still worth sitting down and trying to keep our mind focused, because just the act of doing that, just the attempt to sit quietly, to sit still, and just try to focus inward, focus on our breath, and try to bring our mind back, that itself does help to calm us down. I think you find that, right? At least you're more calm than if you're not meditating. Yeah. But also, we have to be careful not to come to the conclusion that there's something wrong with thinking, that thinking thoughts are bad or wrong, and we shouldn't think. So I think sometimes people get that idea when they encounter meditation. They learn about meditation, read about meditation, try to do meditation. They might get the idea that, oh, thoughts are bad, thinking is bad, we shouldn't think. But that's an extreme. So it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with thinking, that thinking is bad. In itself, it's not bad, because in fact, sometimes it's actually very good. Depends on what you're thinking about and how you're thinking, what you're doing with your thoughts. So, there's very positive things you can do with your thoughts. And in fact, in our tradition of meditation, we actually have meditations that involve thinking. For example, the meditation for cultivating loving kindness, compassion. So this involves thinking, using thoughts to generate feelings of love, feelings of compassion for people who are suffering, people who want to be happy. So we think in ways that will bring about more positive thoughts, positive feelings for others. And the result of this kind of practice is that you do generate more concern for others, more care for others, more love and compassion, which is you're able to bring that into your life and be more loving and kind and caring for others. So that's just an example of how thinking can be very, very beneficial. And also it's just plain necessary, to be able to live in this world, to be able to take care of other people, or to take care of yourself, to do your job, to get your work done, and to take care of your family or your children, your parents, your partner, and so forth. So we need to use thought to be able to think about and understand how to take care of others. And if someone is experiencing a problem, whether it's yourself or another person, there's some problem happening, you need to think about what would be the best way of solving this problem. So thinking itself isn't wrong or bad. It all depends on what kind of thinking we're doing and how we're doing it and what is the result of our thinking. So it's not that thinking is wrong and we should stop all thoughts. But on the other hand, some of the thoughts that we have aren't very positive. Some of them are negative. For example, if we have thoughts of being critical, looking at other people and finding fault with them, being critical and judgmental and negative towards them. So that kind of thought is not helpful. And if we carry on having those kinds of thoughts, then our mind becomes very disturbed. Even if we never do anything, we never act them out or say anything about those thoughts, but just having those in our mind makes our mind very disturbed and unhappy and unpeaceful. So it's not good for us. And then Some thoughts can be even worse. We might even start thinking about or planning or fantasizing about doing hurtful things to other people. And again, even just having those kind of thoughts in the mind is disturbing for our mind. And then if we actually act them out, then it becomes disturbing for other people as well. So those kinds of thoughts we have to look out for. And if they're happening in our mind, we need to try to find ways to undo them, not let our mind get carried away in those kinds of thoughts and change them. And if we're not able to do that on our own, then seek help. Go to somebody and ask for help to, learn how to change your mind. I just thought of a story. This man that I met in America, he became interested in meditation and Buddhism as a result of having very negative thoughts. He was a real estate agent. He was selling real estate. That was his job. And there was one time when he thought that another real estate seller cheated him out of a sale. I don't know exactly how that works, but anyway, he thought he got cheated by another real estate agent and lost a sale of a house. And he got really, really, really angry at this other person. And he was, whenever he had an opportunity, he was saying really negative things about this person, just expressing his anger. And he was also having thoughts about killing this person. So it was that bad. He was actually thinking of murdering this person. And so when that was coming up in his mind, he got really scared because he thought, wow, if I might actually do that, and then I would end up in prison, and that would be really terrible. So he went to see a therapist, a psychologist, to get help for this craziness in his mind. And the therapist suggested that he learn meditation. Meditation would be helpful for him. So he looked for a place and found a Buddhist center and then started doing meditation. And that really helped him a lot to work with his mind, calm down his mind. And then the ironic thing is that later he found out that he was actually wrong. He made, it wasn't actually true that this person had cheated him out of the sale. So it was a complete misunderstanding. So then he realized, wow, he almost, he was getting close to committing murder on the basis of a misunderstanding. So anyway, that's just a story about what can happen with the mind if we're not careful. Our mind can get really, really caught up in very negative things. And so this type of thought we need to look out for and work on, either on your own or get help from somebody else. But we probably don't have too many of those kinds of thoughts in our mind. But other types of thoughts we might have that aren't very helpful would be just repetitive. If we really watch our mind, we'll probably notice that our mind kind of keeps going through the same thoughts again and again and again, like playing the same tape, the same recording again and again, and not doing anything particularly useful, just repetitive or obsessive thoughts and fantasies. So these kinds of thoughts aren't terribly useful and helpful, and again, can make our mind just very disturbed and unpeaceful. So meditation can be helpful for that, just being able to pull our mind away from those kinds of thoughts and come back to something neutral like the breath. But what we need to be careful about is if we do notice negative thoughts in our mind or repetitive thoughts or obsessive thoughts, to try to avoid being judgmental towards ourselves, because otherwise it's very easy to get into being self-critical, self-judging, oh, I'm so bad, I'm so horrible, look at what's going on in my mind, and we kind of beat ourselves up. So try to be on the lookout for that kind of thing happening. And if you notice that happening, don't try not to continue with it. Realize that that is not helpful. That is not healthy. It's not healthy. It's not helpful to beat ourselves up. That's not part of Buddhism. I don't think it's part of any spiritual tradition. So it's a mistake. It's an error that we make. So try to avoid doing that, and instead try to replace that kind of attitude with kindness and compassion. Having a kind and compassionate, friendly, gentle attitude towards yourself. Now, if you're not used to doing that, it's not easy. You have to learn how to do it, but it can be learned. It is possible to learn to be more kind and more compassionate. And one way of doing that is to just think of the kind of attitude that you have towards your friends. You know, like we all have friends, we all have people we like, and we usually treat them well. We treat our friends well. And so we do know how to be kind, how to be friendly, how to be nice to other people. So if we can just take that same attitude that we have towards other people and apply it to ourselves, yeah. Or another way of doing it, if you do find yourself kind of beating yourself up, being self-critical, then it can be helpful to ask yourself, now, if I were to say these kind of things to my friend, would that be nice? If I were to speak to another person the way that I'm speaking to myself, how would that feel? Would I feel good about that? So I think, we would realize that no, it wouldn't be nice to treat another person that way, to speak to another person that way. So why do we think that it's okay to treat ourselves in that way? To talk to ourselves that way. So that might be helpful to kind of wake up and realize that, oh, this isn't nice. It's not nice. It's not nice to treat anybody that way, including myself. So those are some suggestions, but you might find other ways as well to try to change that habit of being hard, being unkind, being critical towards oneself. So please understand that is not helpful, and instead, ideally, we need to try to have an attitude towards ourself, which includes all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the things that come up in our mind, an attitude of non-judgmentalness. So that's very much part of the mindfulness practice as it's taught in therapy and in a secular context. It's explained as having a non-judgmental awareness of whatever's happening in the moment by moment. So having an attitude of being non-judgmental, being kind, being accepting, being gentle towards whatever is happening, whatever is coming up in your mind. Okay, so I'll talk more about that afterwards, but let's take a break now, 10-minute break. And those of you who are new, there's some drinks and snacks upstairs. So before the break, I was talking about the kind of attitude to have towards thoughts or other types of experiences that we might notice in ourselves, and how it's better to try to avoid having a critical attitude, self-critical, self-judgmental attitude, beating ourselves up. So this is the ideal, but it can be difficult, because if we notice things in ourselves that are unpleasant or really negative or ugly, like anger and hatred and jealousy and so on, self-centeredness. So it is hard when we see those kind of things to not react with some sort of dislike or aversion and feel, oh, I don't like this, I don't want this, I want it to go away. But then is it helpful to have that kind of attitude? That's the question. So actually within Buddhism, because there is a lot of discussion about this in traditional Buddhist teachings, there's lists, long lists of different, what are the term is klesha. The Sanskrit Pali term is klesha, which is sometimes translated as delusion or afflictive emotion. So there's different translations for that disturbing emotion. So they include things like anger, hatred, jealousy, greed, pride, and so forth. And so we are advised that we need to look out for these, because they do exist within us. They are part of us, and we need to watch out for them, because otherwise they can get us into trouble. If they come up and overwhelm us, then we can become very disturbed, and we can also act them out and create problems, do harmful things to others, and so forth. So it's a big part of Buddhist practice to know what these are, and then be able to recognize them when they arise in our mind. And some teachers and also some traditions advise a kind of tough, hard stand towards these disturbing emotions. And for example, sometimes they compare them to enemies that we need to fight against, we need to battle against. So it's almost like a war, a battle against these disturbing emotions. So there is that approach, and some people do find that kind of approach helpful and useful and appropriate. But then it's not the only approach. There are other teachers, especially now in the contemporary situation. Some teachers and traditions speak of a softer approach. So for example, Thich Nhat Hanh, I haven't read many of his books, but a little bit, and also I've heard that he advises, for example, when you're feeling anger, and there's anger in the mind, to hold your anger in your arms. I mean, imagine, not in reality, but just imagine holding your arms, in your arms, the anger, the way you would hold a crying baby. So in other words, taking a very caring and loving and compassionate attitude towards the anger, rather than fighting against it. And also, there's a wonderful book by Thich Nhat Hanh that just came out recently called No Mud, No Lotus. And it's all about how to work with suffering and problems. And in there, he advises saying hello to your suffering. So when you're experiencing some problem, some suffering, our usual reaction is to say, go away, leave me alone, I don't want you. So he's advising just the opposite, to say hello to your suffering, to welcome it. And another contemporary teacher, Tara Brach, she's an American, she's a psychologist as well as a meditator and meditation teacher. And she wrote a book called Radical Acceptance. which is advising, advocating, accepting everything, accepting whatever comes up in your mind, even if it's something really ugly or really horrible or really negative, to accept it. And that's she says, this is really the only way to change. If we want to change ourselves, we have to start by accepting ourselves as we are. So this is another approach, another kind of tradition. And I think it's useful to know that there are these different approaches, and then you can try them out and see what works best for you. And so I actually find in my own experience that the second approach is actually very effective. Because if you have some kind of problem or disturbing emotion, negative emotion, and you're kind of doing battle with it, sometimes it just makes it worse. The mind just becomes very disturbed. And on the other hand, it's not always easy to do, but if I'm able to just take this attitude, like Thich Nhat Hanh advises or Tara Brach advises, of just completely accepting it, letting it be, not trying to push it away or fight with it or get rid of it, but just letting it be there, accepting it, and having a caring and kind and compassionate attitude towards it, it just vanishes. The problem just, not always, but sometimes it just dissipates. It just goes away by itself. So it seems to be very effective, that approach. So, so it's something you can try out, these different ways and see what works best. So I thought we could do another meditation, just a short one, and try out some of these things that I was talking about. So once again, make yourself comfortable as much as you can. But also try to sit with a straight back. Because actually, if we slouch, if we bend over or sit in a crooked way, that will affect the mind. The mind will be not as clear and sharp and alert. But at the same time, try to keep your body as relaxed as possible. Let go of any tension you may have. Another method that can help us to let go of tension is to take a few breaths, deep breaths, breathing in slowly and deeply, pausing for a moment, and then exhaling slowly, not in a rush, but just slowly let the breath go out. And you can imagine any tension in the body or in the mind going out with the breath. So do that for 3 breaths, breathing in slowly and deeply, and breathing out slowly and letting go of any tension. Imagine that it just goes out and disappears. And then when you've done those 3 breaths, then just continue breathing in a natural way. And again, try to not control the breath, but just allow the body to breathe in its normal, natural way. And then try to keep your mind, your awareness on the breath for each full inhalation and each full exhalation of the breath. And you can count the breaths if you find that helpful. And then if you notice the mind wandering away from the breath to something else, a thought, a memory, a plan for the future, sound, anything other than the breath, try your best to let go of that other object, disengage your mind from it, and then bring your mind, your awareness back to the breath. And one thing that can be helpful is to make a mental note of what you notice, what kind of thought or what kind of experience arises. You can just say thought or thinking or sound or emotion. So just give it some kind of name or label. And then let it go. It's impermanent. It's not going to stay. It's like a cloud passing through the sky. So let it go and come back to the breath. And remember, it's completely okay to come back to the breath again and again and again. It's not wrong. It's not bad. It's actually a good thing. So I thought for the last few minutes of the class, if you could just get into little groups of 2 or 3 people and just talk with each other about the class tonight and anything you may have learned or anything you found helpful or useful, to share that with each other. Yeah.
Okay.
usually end class with some moments of making a dedication, mentally dedicating the positive energy that we've built up during the class. So it's good if you can to feel good about the fact that you came here tonight and that we did meditation together and talked together, and also at the beginning we try to generate a positive motivation, wanting to benefit ourselves and others and the world. So we did all of this within that kind of motivation of altruism, wanting to be of benefit and not harm. So we've definitely created some positive energy here tonight. And this kind of energy we call merit in Buddhism, said to be the cause of happiness and well-being and spiritual growth. So let's make the dedication that whatever we've learned, whatever good energy we've accumulated here tonight will stay with us and not be lost or forgotten, but continue to be part of our mind and our experience and continue to grow and help us to become more and more positive and happy and peaceful, and then be able to share this positive energy with others so that we can send out this positive energy into the world to bring more peace and happiness, well-being, freedom from suffering and problems to everyone, everywhere in the world. Okay. Thank you for coming. Have a good weekend.